The Netherlands has the world's shortest working week because half of them work part-time. But they have one of the strongest economies in the world. So what is their secret? I wish I hadn't worked so hard is one of the top regrets of the dying. And the Dutch, they seem to understand this because they really don't work all that much. Out of all the developed countries in the world, the Dutch have the shortest work week. And this is mainly due to the fact that 50% of the Dutch population, they work part-time, which has led some to say that working as little as possible has become the Dutch national sport. But why is this even an issue? Because the Netherlands has one of the best economies in the world. Isn't that everyone's dream, a 4-day work week? Well, the government and economists point to a labor shortage. The population is getting older, which means less young people to work. You combine that with a short working week and economists are worried about the future. And while the country's chief economist is concerned about this, his suggestion is not to work more, but to work smarter. This is what work-life balance is all about, and perhaps why Dutch people are one of the happiest people in the world. But there are some unanswered questions. So let's dive deeper into this Dutch part-time work culture, including why do the Dutch work so few hours? How is it possible that they work so few hours? We'll look at some of the scenarios and finances, and what are some of the implications of this part-time work culture. Let's dive in. In the US, I was used to this overtime culture. I used to work in finance, consulting, and regularly worked 45, 50 hours. And my friends and family who work hourly jobs, they always want to work overtime because they get more money. So when I learned about this Dutch part-time culture, I really couldn't believe it. Until I met a colleague who gets every other Monday off, and then she told me she works 36 hours a week. And then 2 friends got 2 new jobs and they decided to work 4 days a week. And I just couldn't understand, how is this possible? Well, before diving deeper to understand why this is possible, let's take a deeper look into the data to understand the context a bit more. First, the Netherlands consistently ranks as one of the best countries in the world for work-life balance. And almost nobody works more than 50 hours per week in the Netherlands. So how many hours do the Dutch actually work? Full-time in the Netherlands is anywhere between 36 and 40 hours. And it's actually quite common to work less than 40 hours in the Netherlands. Again, because half the population works part-time. 70% are female and 30% are male. And most who work part-time are in education, healthcare, and service industries.
So for me, I work the Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and then Wednesday and Friday I'm off. 30 hours a week. 3 days, 10 hours a day.
So how does this compare to other countries? According to Eurostat, the average European work week is 36 hours compared to the Dutch average of 32 hours. The average European male works 38 hours while the average Dutch male works 36 hours. And the average European female works 34 hours while the average Dutch female works 28 hours. And if you look at the US, most full-time workers work on average more than 45 hours per week. And as an American myself, I would tend to agree with these findings. In the US, most people will choose to work full-time if they can. Part-time culture really isn't a thing unless you're a student or maybe you're working a few part-time jobs. But while the Dutch work the fewest hours per week, the Dutch labor participation rate is one of the highest in the world at 85%, meaning 85% of the working population are working. But again, it's mainly women who are working part-time. They were actually late to the job market. In 1971, Dutch women had one of the lowest labor participation rates in Europe. Now, this changed in the 80s when the government decided it'd be a good idea to bring women into the workforce. And through time, this part-time work culture became more of a thing as more women entered the workforce and as societal and policy changes paved the way as well. And then an important law passed in 2000 that really gave flexibility and the freedom to work part-time. This law gave employees the right to change their working hours. Employees can request to change their work times, where they work, and how many hours they work. And employers, they must accept this request unless there's a really good reason not to. But wait, that still doesn't explain why people would want to work part-time. Because in many countries, many people have no choice but to work part-time. But the Dutch, they actually choose to work part-time. I mean, that was the biggest surprise for me because why would people want to work less and get paid less? Show me the money! But that's where the Dutch think differently. And the Dutch Central Bank, they did a study of 1,300 people to understand why people decide to work part-time. The main reasons were caring for children, having more free time, well-being. Many don't need a higher income, they have enough. And some mention that it doesn't make sense financially to work full-time. Well, let's start with time. In the Netherlands, it's really about working to live. Many people would choose to gain more time rather than gain more money.
Time is absolutely more valuable. You need more me time as well. And the Wednesday for me is a recover day. Always doing something, an appointment, either the dentist, doctor, hairdresser. I can pay my bills and do the little extra things I want to do. So that's good. I'm content. And it's such a good balance. What more can I ask for? But it's more than enough.
And there are studies that show we spend 80 to 90,000 hours at work. If you compare how much time the Dutch spend working against other countries, you can see that the Dutch spend less time at work. For example, the Dutch work around 1,400 hours per year compared to the OECD average of 1,775 and the US average of 1,821. If we assume the average person will work 40 years over their lifetime, you will see that Americans, for example, will work 16,000 hours more than the Dutch over their lifetime.
So this is a culture that truly values time. And with more time, that also brings about more time to help out society, to volunteer. For example, half the Dutch population volunteers every year. And it makes me think about the popular book by nurse Bronnie Ware. She wrote about the top regrets of her patients on their deathbeds. And one of them was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Many people regretted spending so much time at work and not enough time on their loved ones. And if we look at the research at what makes a good life, the most important finding is quality relationships. And the Dutch, they have the ability to spend more of this time on their loved ones, on themselves. Another reason why the Dutch work so few hours is because daycare and childcare are really expensive.
For example, a couple with one parent working part-time pays 17% of their net income in childcare costs, which is above the OECD average of 10%.
Childcare costs depend on where you live, the type of childcare, and how many days you want your kid to go in. And while it is expensive, you do get subsidies from the government depending on income levels. For example, you can get anywhere between 33 and 96% back from the government depending on how much you make. In terms of parental leave benefits, mothers get 16 weeks off. Fathers, they only get 1 week off. But both parents can take additional time off until the kid is 8, and they get 70% paid back in the first 9 weeks. This is sometimes called mama dog or papa dog, where mothers or fathers will take an additional day off to be at home. In fact, half of all new fathers make use of this benefit. And because daycare is so expensive, many parents will decide to work less when they have kids.
Because a family could be spending anywhere between a quarter to over half their net income on daycare costs. And a colleague told me that certain kindergartens are more expensive if you want hot meals. She wanted her son to have a warm lunch and decided to pay more.
And it can actually be smarter for parents to work less because daycare is so expensive.
Let's take a look at an example. A couple earns $100K and is thinking whether they should send their kids to daycare 3 or 4 days a week. And it does make sense to work less because while they would make less money, they save more money by not sending their kids to an additional 1 or 2 days of daycare.
This is a very common scenario that I've heard from parents where both parents will decide to work 4 days. One will be off on Monday, the other will be off on Friday, and their kids will go to daycare 3 days a week from, say, Tuesday through Thursday. Not only do they save money, but they actually spend more time with their children.
And what about those without kids? For example, can I afford to work part-time as a single person in Amsterdam? Well, if I look at the average salaries and my own living expenses in Amsterdam, I'm only getting by. And if I decide to reduce my working hours, it would be almost impossible to live in Amsterdam on my own unless I make more money, or I find a flatmate and eat only ramen every day, or I move out of Amsterdam.
Lastly, due to the high taxes in the Netherlands, it may actually demotivate people from making more money above a certain point because anything above 73,000 is taxed at 50%. I remember when I first started working in the Netherlands, I met a Dutch guy from Amsterdam, and he told me there isn't a big incentive for people to climb up the corporate ladder here like there is in the US, because the higher up you go, the more responsibility you get, the more stress. But you don't get paid as much as you do in the US, and you get taxed a lot more. And the truth is, you don't need to be a vice president to live a good life in the Netherlands. So how are these short working weeks working for the Dutch? Well, it seems to be working. The Dutch workforce is still extremely productive compared to other countries around the world.
If we look at GDP per capita, which is a measure of economic performance and how well off a country is, one can see that the Netherlands has one of the strongest economies in the world. And if we look at productivity as measured by output per hour worked, you can see that the Netherlands is also one of the most productive countries in the world, even with the short work weeks.
And many studies show the benefits of having a 4-day work week. Increased productivity, increased happiness. And if we look at the research that Gallup has done, what they find is the most optimal work week in terms of productivity. It's anywhere between 30 and 35 hours.
So what can we learn from the Dutch about not working so hard? Well, let me remind you of one of the top regrets of the dying. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And the Dutch, many of them truly value time. Time for themselves. Time with loved ones. Now this is what work-life balance is all about. When people want to work less, they can work less, and the system supports it. And this is what enables happiness to flourish.